I'm thrilled to welcome my guest, Dave Phillips, to the podcast today. Dave holds 2 graduate degrees in counseling psychology and has over 30 years' experience in the mental health field, including working with hundreds of companies in multiple industries. His expertise and certifications include psychological health and safety, trauma and PTSD, management coaching, mental health first aid, mental health HR and LR, respect in the workplace, and substance abuse in the workplace. I've known Dave for the better part of 30 years and find him to be a very empathetic expert in this field of mental health, of psychology, and I'm just so excited to talk with him today. Let's welcome Dave Phillips. A lot of you listening know that our focus here at Move Daily Fitness is on fitness, wellness, and nutrition. But honestly, the most important factor that I think, if you don't pay attention to this, you miss out on a whole aspect of your life, is that wellness piece. And today's guest, we're going to talk all about that. We're going to dive deep into some counseling theories. We're going to have some personal stories. I'm just really looking forward to it. Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Trace. Good to be with you. Wellness, and yeah, I mean, it's not even to me. It's not even an aspect. We
No,
are we are we're not so sequestered as human beings, right? We have a mind, we have feelings, we have a body, we have a soul, we have all of these aspects of who we are, and they all influence each other. So it's and if you had to make a case, which one seems to influence our overall well-being the most, it's our mental wellness. Yeah, for sure.
it is. And I find, over the years of working with women and men, it impacts our decisions in our nutrition. It can impact our desire or motivation in our fitness. Like, it really is intertwined. And one of the things we talk about a lot is knowing thyself and understanding the parts of ourselves that rise up and can block some of our progress forward, both internally and physically in our bodies. So I'm just so excited that you're here to talk to us. We've known each other for, I want to say, the better part of 30 years, right?
Oh, I'm gonna say 1981.
Yep.
So that's
Yep.
44 years I've
Oh,
known you.
mercy. Yeah, that's a
Uh,
long time. Yeah.
yeah,
Dave was my youth pastor growing up. And
yeah. I was well. That's like a long time ago in my life. I mean, I'm
yeah,
not that guy anymore.
yeah.
Still a very, very spiritual person, but not in a structured way. But yeah, that was a cool part of my life. I love being with that cool youth group in Kamloops, and you were the same as you are now. Or you're just a full of energy, wonderful, intelligent human being, and I loved sharing life with you a little bit there. So that was great. By the way, so I told you I want to start this by saying, give you a compliment
Okay.
because you said something to me about, let's say, maybe 10 years ago, maybe longer, not really sure, that I never lost it, and now is becoming such a big part of my life. So full disclosure, I'm now 66. I'm, getting into that stage of my life, where I gotta start thinking a lot about really good habits of life that will hold me. And I think for my age, I'm doing phenomenal. And you said to me, in reference to working with folks over 60, you said working out should be their full-time job.
Yeah.
You kind of dropped that thing. And I, at the time, and I was a wellness director of an organization at the time, so I'd never heard it quite so overtly. And so I have found over the last 2 years, I just keep coming back to and now I think full-time job, I mean, not that quite that extreme, but that every single day I've got to be paying attention to intentional physical development, right? So working out, movement, exercise, whatever it might be, has just been absolutely core. And I always reference you. I said, "Yeah, Tracy's the one who's given this to me." I mean, I get it. I'm all of us are, we're on a certain downhill slope. Eventually,
Totally. Yeah.
my life's gonna say no more. But I've found by paying attention to my physical health to the degree that I am, and it takes a lot of my focus and time, it pays off. right? It just,
Yeah.
recently my doctor took me off all my meds, so I have no meds anymore. She says you have the heart of a teenager, and
Amazing.
I give you a lot of credit for that. So that's a
Uh,
great mantra. And again, it's just like once you get over 60, if you want quality of life,
yeah.
and how many of us, want quality of life. We can't change some things, DNA is DNA, but we can certainly improve, pain, sleep, these sorts of things by so much. So thank you. Good compliment for you.
Oh,
Had
thank
this
you.
big impact on my life. Yeah.
I'm so glad because it's so, like you said, important. Um, so you shifted into psychology, this like probably 40
Therapy.
years
Yeah.
ago, 30 therapy.
Yeah.
What made that shift for you and why was
Yeah.
it so important for you to jump into this field?
Well, at the time I had gotten a graduate degree in divinity, and it had a counseling major. So I was working for a church up in Edmonton as kind of the counseling pastor, but also working with college kids. I really kind of enjoyed that. It was fun, but I now had at that point, I was now married, had two little boys, had a mortgage, had a responsible job, and here I'm in my late 20s, and there's a line from a movie called Magnolia that says,
Mm,
you may be done with your past, but your past ain't done with you." And that's it. Really,
mm,
I grew up in a really challenging life. Foster homes. My mom, who I love dearly, always loved dearly, but she at the time, these weren't words we used at the time, but probably if we look back, we'd say she was bipolar.
mm,
And my dad, again, a man I've come to respect so much, but he had his challenges with gambling and alcohol and violence. And so this was my early years, and I just never dealt with it
mm.
ever. And then when I was in Edmonton, I had my first major depressive episode. I remember laying on my bed, not with a sheet over my head, and I wouldn't go to work. I didn't want to go to work. And here's my wife, Adele. She's got two little boys at home, babies. And she says, "Dave, you got to go to work. I don't want to. They're going to fire me and all this." And when I went in to tell the senior pastor, that I just wasn't making it, I said, I just not a good pastor, Al. I just know it. He goes, and he's had a Brooklyn accent. He goes, "Oh, Dave, we all know you're not a good pastor." He
Oh,
said, he just laughed. There's so much compassion, but he said, "But you're an exceptional counselor." He says, "But your degree isn't good enough. I think you need to go get a better degree." So over the next year or so, we got things together, and I went down to school to States to get a second graduate degree in marriage and family therapy. And it was the start of programs that where students actually had to do their own counseling as part of the program, right? And so that was the first time I ever started looking at my own issues and therapy. I remember sitting in the library in my very first year in this graduate program, and I was just reading this book, and there was one of my fellow students was beside me, and I said, "Larry, I keep seeing this acronym on the page that says ACOA. What does that mean, ACOA?" And he said, "Oh, that's adult child of an alcoholic."
mm,
And it almost hit me, knocked me over. That's a thing? That's a
wow.
thing? Like what my thing is a thing? And it, weirdly enough, Trace, it was so validating that
Mm,
I wasn't making this up. And that was really the start of, a process of healing that just, really culminated about 4 or 5 years ago. It took a long time, but I really did the first 50% of my healing when I was in grad school, just through therapy. And then when I became a therapist, working in Fraser Valley, as funded by a local church, was just really generous of them. We just established a counseling center there, which is still going strong. It's a
mm,
great work there, CARES Counseling. And, it was really working with my clients, trying to understand trauma, trying to understand this new thing that was hitting the therapy world, then that I would also apply it to myself, And then in '98, I know this is some of what you want to talk about today. In '98, I had the really good fortune. So I was at the time, I was working with a group of women who at the time were diagnosed with multiple personality disorder. Now we would call it dissociative identity disorder, but people who are pretty fragmented inside and just having a lot of trouble. But I just love them all. They're just wonderful people with some of the most horrific childhood stuff, right? But it was hard and I was struggling, didn't know what to do. And I remember sitting around thinking, I wonder if my family systems theory could apply to their internal world. And I was kind of mucking around that when I read an article
Mm.
by a guy named Richard Schwartz, who developed a model. No one had ever heard about it really back in the 90s, called internal family systems. And when I read this kind of article that he wrote, he was ticking all the boxes for me. It's exactly what I think. That's how I see it. I said, I got to get trained by this guy. So I did in 98. I took a training with him, and it just was life changing for me. Absolutely. I'd never thought of myself in this way. I remember he did this guided imagery with us, and he said, okay, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to imagine all your parts. And IFS is all about our parts and understanding our life as parts. And and for whatever reasons, what kind of emerged in my visualization was like a lobby of an old British inn or something like that. Why? Who knows? But and so I'm looking out over this lobby, and there's chairs and stuff, and all my parts are sitting there.
Mm.
And I could feel the hatred in the room. I could feel the emotional
Mm.
violence. And I stood up and I walked across this room, and there was no one's talking, no parts were talking, but they're all looking at me. I could feel them looking at me. I went behind the counter and I put a sign up on the wall, and it said love. It just said love. And so then I turned to face all my parts, and they're all staring at me. I said, I know you don't know who I am. And really, I'm speaking for self at this point. I said, I know you don't know who I am, but it turns out I'm the leader of us.
Mhm.
And I'm so sorry it's taken this long for me to kind of, take my role. I said, but you don't have to change. You can be who you are, but from here on in, I'm only going to deal with you through the lens and voice of love. And that was a turning point in my life. Absolutely. But of course, you deepen understanding. I mean, it can be pretty tricky. Our parts can be pretty tricky, but that made such a huge difference in my life.
Yeah, that is, I remember you using that illustration years ago, which is how I started to understand these parts. And it's almost like, um, in my mind, how I think about it sometimes is like not masks that we wear, but personas that rise to protect our true wise self or our small parts. Could you explain a little bit about why we start to develop parts around
Yeah.
us and when
Yeah.
did they start to develop in our lives?
Yeah, and I speak of it kind of in a binary way, but of course there's shades and whatnot. Not everyone's so distinct into one camp or the other. But I can think of I've been married to Adele for 43 years now. She's just my best friend and the greatest person in my life. You know her, and just so wonderful. And so you can contrast me to Adele. It's just really, really easy. So um, the human infant comes into life, I think, fairly optimistic. At least that we believe the brain comes into life
Mhm.
fairly optimistic, expecting a certain kind of experience, notably for the first 2 years of life. And we call that attachment, right? And so the brain is expecting a certain kind of attachment. It doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to go at the top, but just so that in generally speaking, the child has their basic needs met, feels cared for by their his or her parent, but primarily mom, right?
Mhm.
And so the mental health of the home, the mental health of the mother has a lot to do with that. And but if it's just more or less okay, the brain knows what to do with that and is able to take that kind of security as a base. And then we know that the brain and the organs develop a certain way that it's not a great word anymore, but we might just say call normal or typical kind of way that we know things develop. And that's my wife. And so this model of internal family systems has never had to be something she's had to work a lot with, because
Mm.
I call it's just all working organically inside of her. So this part that we call self, this kind of wise, kind of eternal part of ourselves with knowledge and wisdom, it's not verbal, it's not conscious, but it's there, and it just guides us. And we might think of it as our core values, who we want to be, in the different relationships of our life, relationship with like a partner, with children, with to our work, to ourselves, to our community, to our planet, whatever. And so these different areas of relationship, we say, who do I want to be? Well, those are our values. And people who grow up generally, we say, securely attached enough, and again, doesn't have to be perfect, but just enough, seem to have a really nice organic connection with their values. So as I've watched, my life partner for 43 years, I mean, she struggles like anyone else. She's got her issues like anyone else, but more or less she's consistent. She's kind of the same person across time. Okay, so that's and while we struggle to get exact numbers, we're probably talking about 25% of the adult population have that
Mhm.
kind of secure base, right? So it's actually not that common. We kind of
No.
jokingly refer to them as unicorns. They they're around here and there,
Yeah.
and and then there's those of us. Um, we come into life with the same expectation, but things happen. It can be there's just too much stress, or there can be violence. There can be mental illness, incarceration, just stuff that happens to a lot of people, probably 70%, 75% of people. And if it's too much for the little child, for the little infant, being basically narcissistic, they just internalize all this stuff, right? And it's not a cognitive process, it's just a brain process. And the brain, it's like the brain says, it's the way I make sense of it, Tracy, is it's like the brain says, okay, no worries, we can adapt to this. We didn't realize that this is going to be, but we got a sub program, and that's called survival. So it's up to us. It's up to me. If I'm going to stay alive, it's my job to stay alive. So I have to figure this out. And for the next X years, that's what I do. Is my brain is trying to figure out how to stay alive. So how does a brain do that? How does a brain protect itself? Because we call this early childhood stuff, like we call it trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's an overused word these days, but when we think of post-traumatic stress disorder, that's the trauma part of it. And trauma is really any experience we have from our subjective point of view that is so scary, so overwhelming, and we lose our agency. We can't, and we're trapped that it feels like we're about to die. And now, for you and me, that would be like a bus about to hit us or something like that. But when we're 10 months old,
Mm-hmm.
that could be an inability to have my mom care for me because perhaps she's depressed. And I'm not a mother blamer. I'm not trying to put moms down because they got their own stuff going on. And but from the point of view of the child, right, that can feel life threatening. And when we go through these awful, awful experiences, the brain basically says, "Wow, that was horrible. We're never going to let that happen again as far as we can prevent it," right? That's sort of because the brain, more than anything else, is a survival brain. It knows how to stay alive. And so then it's like, okay, how are we going to figure that out? So for me, my brain looks inside my own developing humanity, right? What are the resources this guy brings to the table? What are the strengths? And so, I'm really smart. And so my brain says, wow, we can leverage that.
Yeah.
I got a very kind of outgoing, charming personality, right? And so, wow, he can be a people pleaser. This guy can win people over. I'm
Mm.
very strong. I'm very industrious. And so I began to develop these, what I'll call protector parts,
Right.
manager parts, that they have their own little thing going on. They don't care about anyone else. But like, say, let's take this hardworking part of me. Because getting into trouble was always so scary for me as a little boy, I'd get hurt very badly. This
Mm.
part says if you work hard enough, you just work, 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 work. If you work, then you are really mitigating the chances that you're going to get in trouble, right? And I got a number of these parts, and I mean, that's beautiful, right? That my brain figured out how to stay alive, and these parts work in their own ways for decades. Sometimes I had one person say, "I spent the first 30 years of my life trying to figure out how to defend myself, and the next 30 years of my life trying to take those defenses down," right? because
Yeah.
because I get it. If when I was just a little boy in foster care or whatever, yeah, that was pretty awful, but that's not my life today. I'm not in danger today, but that's too late. The brain's already decided that it's got to protect me. And then sometimes our protectors, these managing parts that are always going ahead of me, trying to keep me safe, that feels like anxiety. Um, when
Mm.
they don't do their job well enough, so when these feelings of the three feelings we think of for these trauma feelings are terror, I'm about to die; shame, I'm essentially a horrible, unlovable person; or abandonment, I'm alone and I will never be loved.
Mm.
When those feelings start to creep in, they get triggered. Like if someone say rejects you, it feels like I'll be alone forever. When those feelings start leaking in, we have another subset of parts that are just basically pain managers, and they can find ways through actual substances like alcohol, illicit drugs, opiates, you whatever, to actually just change our blood chemistry. Or because we have a pharmacy in the brain, they can actually create uh, neurochemicals from behaviors, sex, fantasy, working out sometimes can be it,
Mhm.
shopping, internet addictions, gambling, high risk behaviors. Just so many iterations of it, right? And they just medicate us, right? They
Mhm.
just numb our feelings, horrible feelings, which in the short term is a very compassionate kind of thing. The long term, not. We end up doing things we hate. We hurt
Yeah.
people. We get arrested or we lose our jobs. It's just like a long litany of that. And so that for my clients, for myself, whatnot, it's that treadmill that my brain is just trying to stay alive. And I've asked my clients, like, who do you want to be? So they might be talking about in their life as a father or something like that. Who do you want to be? And they always tell me the most beautiful things. I've worked almost with 15,000 people, Tracy. I haven't met a bad person yet. So I'm just telling you that.
Mm, I know.
Everyone, once
Yeah.
you get through the stuff,
Hmm.
everyone wants the same thing.
Sure.
They want to love, they want to be loved. And we're all the same. And so they have these values, and I say, okay, this is where you want to be. And I go, and where is your life now? And they always say this is what's holding them back. I said, this is what we need to do. We need to bring your life back into alignment. And for many people, they found that this model, internal family systems, is a really easy, kind of understandable way to start working inside, because we also have this other aspect of ourselves which didn't get abused, didn't get hurt by the abuse, is wise and
Mm,
healing and able, but there's so much noise. The trauma is so much noise. It's just like it's so far back there. So we have to just we just unblending. That's what we call. We just have to keep unblending these parts so that the more self energy is felt, and it's really, I think it's considered probably the most effective model internally family systems out there. Again, I love it. It's because it's so portable. People don't need to stay with their therapist forever, but they can just learn the basics and just start practicing it. Now, the caveat for me, and most of us therapists, is I realized this is probably when you and I are really working closely together, right around that time. I realized that for about half my clients, we could only get so far with this, right?
mm,
We would hit a
mhm.
wall, and I'm working hard, they're working hard. There's no problem there. And that's because for some people to access this trauma energy, to allow it to be processed in the body, let it work its way through, it's just too hard. It's too much. And so that's why we've had to develop other techniques to try to access that trauma. But it can be what I'm describing, and I'm sure your listeners, many of them understand this. It can be like a lifelong journey,
Yeah.
But once you finally start getting things chugging inside the way you want, it's a beautiful thing, right? I look at my life. I'm just so proud of myself, the people in my life who have supported me through a long, long healing process. But it's worth it. I feel like that term satisfied mind. That's kind of how I feel these days.
Yeah. Always a work in progress. So, from what you said, typically around 70% of people will suffer from or work with, I don't want to say suffer from because I guess,
No,
should
well,
I
they
say
can suffer,
suffer?
but I mean, I know you don't want to be like
Doesn't have to be, right?
pathological, but
Right.
but
But
no, it is
experience.
their life is suffering from it. Yeah.
Yeah, and the experience either big T trauma or little T trauma. And I'd love for you to explain the difference between those two things. Because I feel like in my life, I've experienced some little T trauma. And then
Yeah.
in a moment, I'm just going to share a little story with you. But I'd love first for you to explain to us the difference between those two things.
Yeah, yeah, and you open up these questions, and I could talk about these things for like 4 or 5 hours. I mean, I teach stuff, right? So, one of the things that I think is useful for all of us is if you think of a continuum, right? 0 to 100, and let's just use the word trauma again to describe any situation that's upsetting for us, right? So 0 to 100, right? And somewhere along that line, so this is 0% trauma, this is 100% trauma. Somewhere along the line, we, like the therapy community, psychology community, we put a line. and we call that line post-traumatic stress disorder, right? And so if you're kind of north of that line, you're diagnosable, you have a certain set of symptoms, and we say you have PTSD, which is obviously a very serious mental health condition. I'm not trying to water it down at all. But so if you're south of the line, you don't have PTSD, but that's a bit of a misunderstanding. It just means you don't meet this particular diagnostic criteria. But what's the difference? Let's just we call the line 70%. What it's all arbitrary, whatever the number is, 70% from you have PTSD. Well, what's the difference between someone with 71 and 69? Like even though one's going to get
Right.
diagnosed and one won't, but there's very little difference. So I try to think of that in terms of like, so you're on this continuum somewhere, and this is what this side of it, this sort of non-diagnosable side, I just call it post-traumatic stress, but not necessarily post-traumatic stress disorder. And so what that means, here's a basic experiment. You take these mice that love the scent of cherry blossom, right? It's their favorite food, and you expose them to cherry blossom, so they start running towards the cherry blossom, and then you shock them. And so it's just classic conditioning. And you only need to do it 4 or 5 times. And you've permanently installed this, what they call the trauma response. So then you can expose them to the scent of cherry blossoms. And instead of them running toward it, they have this aversive reaction, right?
Mhm.
So that's what that is on the continuum somewhere. If it's like a massive aversive reaction, we'll call it, PTSD. So this is where we get like this big T, little t kind of thing. So when we talk about big T traumas, we're talking about those experiences that most everybody is going to have a pretty serious reaction to. Natural disasters, war, first responder kind of stuff, sexual assaults, crime. So when those things happen, um, everyone's going to experience, some of these really harsh things like horror, fear, whatever it might be, nightmares, just all the kind of stuff, right? Um, but about 60% of people, or actually I'll flip it, about 45% of people will never develop in any term long-term symptomology from that. So, but a good percentage, 55, 60% will, if it's not treated, right? If it's not attuned to, which we can get into, by the way, fascinating stuff on that. But and so that's big T trauma. And most people, when they hear the word trauma, someone might say, well, I was traumatized as a kid. Most people will reflect, well, I wonder if I was traumatized. And that's typically what they're thinking about. They're thinking about, did I have the big T trauma? Was I sexually
Mhm.
molested or,
Yeah.
whatever? And the guy wasn't, so I didn't have trauma. That's one way of understanding trauma, this big T, but there's what we call little T trauma. And these aren't quite as obvious, but they happen over time, right? So it could be like, say, again, all love to my mom, to Audrey. She's a beautiful woman. But let's say when she was in her depression, right? She wouldn't be able to uh, care for her three little babies, all born quickly together, into basic poverty. She's just trying to keep us alive. And so she wouldn't necessarily be aware that I wouldn't have been aware of it as a little child. I was feeling very alone,
Mhm.
and so over time, call those little T traumas. They're not so obvious, but they can have the same impact. As a matter of fact, a lot of theorists believe that though they're probably more challenging in the long run because we tend
Mhm.
not to pay attention to them. We kind of dismiss
Yes.
them and push them away.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so for a lot of people, so I did most of my practice in the Fraser Valley, which is colloquially known as the Bible Belt. So
Mhm.
I worked with a lot of spiritual abuse. Most of my clients, like a very typical client that I worked with, in the 90s and 2000s, would have been like people who were very sensitive as children, but exposed to a lot of fear. And, their parents were well intentioned. No one's trying to hurt their kids. They thought, hey, we're doing what we're supposed to do. We're teaching about heaven and hell and all that sort of stuff. But they just might have done it in a way that really overwhelmed the little child. Like I've heard
Yeah.
thousands of stories of like saying I went to bed terrified. The Sunday school teacher said this, and I went to bed terrified and I couldn't sleep. And that again, I'm not trying to point fingers or anything, but those are the sorts of things that we tend not to notice, but they can really lead a sensitive child into a very fear-based kind of way of living. And when people say, depression is the most common mental health problem, well, it is. I mean, but depression as like itself isn't all that common. Really, what most people have is depression comorbid with anxiety. And so what happens is they're just anxious all the time. They worry. Their systems are never at rest. And so the chemicals that, kind of go into our bloodstream, adrenaline, noradrenaline, norepinephrine, cortisol, these sorts of chemicals that are fight or flight kind of central nervous system responses to thinking, hey, I'm a little bit of danger. They have a big impact on the body, and one of them is that they can really damage, or not damage, really dissipate serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter that helps us have a sense of well-being and balance kind of in life. And so when you worry, it's like burning serotonin, like kindling, right? And so
Mm.
then people can have a crash. They can be depressed for like a week, a month. They go to their doctors. They never go to their doctors for anxiety. They always go to their doctors for depression. And the doctor said, "Wow, you're depressed. We need to put you on antidepressants," which is going to, look at the symptoms of depression, but it's really missing the, like, why are you afraid? Like, why are you worried all the time about what people are going to think about you or how you look, or is there enough money in the bank and all this? Like, what's driving all of that
Yeah.
worry? And really it's early trauma. Yeah, that's what's going on.
Yeah, that is so interesting. And that's where knowing thyself and doing the work within this is, I think, is so important, right? You have this low line stress or low line chronic cortisol drip because you're anxious constantly. And
Well, let me
that,
talk about the anxiety
yeah,
first, because
okay.
so I had a client in last year, and I'll change a few details, but basically this is an amalgam of thousands of people I've seen. But I had this
Yeah.
client, and good kid, and he tells me it's going. Like, he says, I said, okay, what's the problem? He says, I have an anxiety disorder. He goes and explains to me all that's happening, and what he's been in counseling for 5 years, been in therapy for 5 years. I asked him, are you getting any better? He goes, oh, I love my therapist. Love my therapist. It's great. Are you getting any better? No, I'm not getting any better. And to me, it's like, that's not good enough. And I'm sorry to
Yeah.
my whole field, but if we aren't seeing improvement in our clients, we as the therapists need
Yeah.
to be asking, like,
But you got a new friend, so there's that.
which is lovely. And it's nothing
Sure.
wrong with having someone that we can tell our problems to, but we don't go to the therapist for a friend. We go there because we got a problem and the problem needs solving. Okay, so he's telling me this thing. And so this human was an engineer. Okay, so really smart, father of two kids, and in an urban setting. And I'm sure all your listeners have kids, knows how challenging it is just to be married and raise children and have a career. Well, that takes a lot of work. And so I thought to myself, I said, look, so you've been taught somewhere by the medical model or by friends or whatever, a documentary, but you have come to believe that you've got a bad brain, that we use the word disorder. You have a
Mhm.
disorder of anxiety, which seems to imply to the patient that there's something wrong with their brain. And I said, there's nothing wrong with your brain. If I could liken your brain to an automobile, your brain is like a Ferrari, or like a high-end Maserati. I mean, if your brain was broken, you wouldn't be employed like this. You wouldn't be raising your children, getting them to school on time with lunch. Like, you're juggling lots of balls. Disorders don't work so you're good here and bad there. It doesn't work that way. You are far too functional. I said, there's nothing wrong with your brain. You have no problem with your brain at all. He's like staring at me. He goes like, what's my problem? I said, well, you were injured. You have an injury you have a psychological, emotional, relational injury, which is very serious, and it needs to get treated. I said, you have post-traumatic stress disorder. He said, why has no one ever told me that before? And, honestly, Tracy, it's not that hard to diagnose this. And I would say that nowadays, anyways, the lion's share of therapists are, we call it trauma informed. So
Yeah.
in other words, they're going to assume that the symptoms that are coming in the room do come from a trauma base, unless something else presents itself, like some mental disease, like bipolar or something, which is a disease of the brain, and it's very serious and it's medical and whatnot. So I'm not trying to downplay that, but the lion's share of people that are in therapy there's nothing wrong with their brains. at all. So we just don't need to be mucking around with the neurochemistry of their brains. I don't mind any short-term symptom relief is fine. That's fine. Let's be
Yeah.
palliative and helpful. But so I just wanted to kind of get that out there. This because I know so many people hear this term anxiety disorder, and it almost like disempowers them a little bit. So
Yeah.
like
It's like,
I guess
well, I got, this is what I
I got the
got.
thing, so I guess
Yeah.
this is just
Yeah.
and I
It's
like
my
no
life.
no 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 no.
Yeah.
And this and one of the things like one of the reasons I love internal family systems, it says let me help you understand your brain from this model. And when people start hearing it, they just go, what? This is not all of me? No, it's a part of you that's scared right now. It's not all of
Right.
you. Now, when it gets into your cortex and starts taking over the controls of your brain, sure, it feels like you. It feels like all of you, but it's not. You can step back from it. You can notice it. You can try to understand it. And that's what the model, is all about. And it can be so helpful for people.
I love that reframe a lot because exactly, then you are not the thing. It is a part of you, and all parts are welcome, right?
Yeah.
As
Well, they have to
Dr.
be welcome.
Schwartz teaches. Yeah,
Because they're
exactly.
me. They're me.
Yeah.
My brain didn't go to like Walmart of personality traits and say, "Oh, give me some of this, some of that." My brain has to work within me. When I was, I remember when I was working within the church environment, there was this one guy who had lots of challenge with sex and sexuality and like inappropriate behaviors, like bad, hurtful behaviors. All of this, just lost his marriage, just really hard stuff. And this guy was his 30s, just a young man,
Mm,
prime of life kind of stuff. And he told me that his sexuality, that sex part of him, the sex drive was evil, and
mm,
that he believed that the best thing to do would be just to excise it, to get rid
mm.
of it. And he was seriously considering castration at that time, believing that that was his way to get healthy. And I think we tried to, if I could just get rid of this part of me,
Yeah.
if I could just get rid of the part that wants to eat, if I get rid of the part that wants to drink or is always interrupting people or whatever, if I could just get rid of that part, then I'd be okay. And it's like you'd be castrating yourself. It's like you're not going to be a
Mm,
complete person if like this part of you that you hate so much is causing you so many problems is just an overworked part. It's extreme. But it like when I look at my workaholism, for example, and it caused me problems. I would get depressed because I worked so hard. My wife wasn't happy, whatnot. But it's just an extreme form of a lovely part of me, which is industrious. I love working hard. I'm never going to apologize for that. I love that aspect of I've got good energy and I like to stay engaged. And so, once it comes out of its kind of soldier role,
mm,
this kind of like I'll protect you at all times, Dave. Once it starts relaxing a little bit, I can now celebrate it's more balanced part of my overall me. So you're right. We don't want to get rid of these parts. We want to welcome them all. They are part of me. We want to understand them, get to know them. Most parts, when we get to know them, I know at the start they sound so crazy and they're doing such extreme things. Like you said earlier, once you get to really listen to what's going on, you're going to find they're trying to protect you and that they've given it's like, never again on my watch am I going to let you, Dave, or you, Tracy, never again am I going to let you feel so vulnerable ever again.
mhm,
By the way, I found that word vulnerable. That's the one that
mhm,
really connects with people. They realize, yeah, that like if I if I date, I'm going to be vulnerable, or if I don't lose 15 pounds, I'm going to be vulnerable. There's just this idea that these parts, like, I'm going to keep you safe. And of course, we've got three
mhm,
or four main ones, and they're all working at different ways of doing that. And it's just like a crazy hodgepodge inside of our brains. But, you can imagine a ball of string, really tightly wound ball of string. It's just all meshed together and tangled and whatnot. That's how people feel. They just
mm,
feel like a ball of tangled string. They have no idea how to work with it. But what we try to do is, okay, let's start taking it off one string at a time, one string at a time. And once you start doing that, then it starts, oh, well, I can work with one string. I can't work with the ball, but I can work with one string. And
mhm.
then in the model, if you get two or three of these main ones, the generalized effect kicks in, and like it really can make a huge difference. I know I mentioned it before, but I always have to say, but for some of us, the trauma is just too big that we need some sort of extra therapeutic intervention so that the what has to happen is those. So for me, the just deep abandonment I felt in this foster home, for example. I'm all alone, me against the world. This is horrible. I'm going to die. That had to have an opportunity to work its way through my body, right?
Yeah.
And that can be hard for people. So you have to do it in a way that's manageable. But once that energy's through, like I think of this, I have this little 2-year-old part of me is now with me. It wasn't with me before. It was buried in my body, buried in my deep body memory. I could feel its influence, but I could never talk with it, never access it. Now it's here. It gets triggered a lot, right? Because it's still a very sensitive little part of me, but it's here. I can talk to this part, work with this part. So I'm not so like terrified of rejection or whatever it might be.
Yeah. You said, yes, there are other therapies, and I wanted to just go into that for a few minutes here and talk about some of those other therapies. One of the experiences that I've been a part of, not with Dave specifically, but I know that you trained and coached all of the therapists that held this, but it's with psychedelics, psilocybin specifically, and doing some therapy with uh, therapists around. And
Yeah, yeah,
one of
yeah,
the,
yeah.
yeah, so one of the experiences that I had, and I did share this on another podcast with Peg Peters, but I wanted to share this here now since this is what we're talking about, and really exploring some of our parts. I came face to face with one of mine, and I wouldn't say that I had big T trauma, growing up. I had a really great childhood as well,
Yeah,
happy
yeah.
life, happy
Good family.
parents.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, good family. But my way of behaving in my family circle, like currently, this was a few years ago, was it was being disruptive. It wasn't serving me. And so there were parts of me that I wanted to begin to figure out. And so I
Yeah.
went into this experience. And one of the things that was the most profound thing that I learned was, so just to explain it a little bit, yes, this is a therapeutic environment. You're doing this with counselors, and you do a lead up into like a
Preparation. Yeah.
session like this, a preparation. So we did 12 weeks lead up. So you're
Yeah,
getting,
yeah.
you're having the proper attention to, your mental health before you go into a session.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so once I was in the session, and I started to I started to become afraid, and I knew going into a session like this that I'd have to explore some parts of me that I didn't want to look at. So I could tell I was already very anxious about going there and looking at these things.
Yeah.
And so in that fear, I called out for a counselor's hand, and one of the therapists came over, and I grabbed her hand, and then someone else's hand, because I was feeling very afraid and timid and
Vulnerable.
nervous. Vulnerable, exactly what you just said. I was vulnerable. And around one of the therapist's wrists was a hair elastic. And I felt the hair elastic with my finger, and I latched onto it. And instantly I had the most amazing thought in my brain, was that when I am afraid, I attach. And I knew that that's what it meant in relationship for me as well, that when I'm afraid of losing something,
You can
instead
feel
of
it.
being
Yeah.
authentic and vulnerable, I attach. And
Mhm.
it was like a light bulb went on in my life. And I couldn't believe that that's what my experience was with so many people.
Like
And
you
so
say, I met this part of me, right?
I met, yeah. And what I do with that attachment is I shut down my authenticity.
Yeah.
So I would rather take one for the team and not say anything than be authentic and risk losing a relationship with these
Which is the
people.
worst thing for this, like the worst
Yeah,
fear of all, right? Yeah,
totally,
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
totally. And
yeah.
I was so amazed that that came out of that experience. And then I knew that I had to go through all of the people that I was afraid of losing attachment with. So I
Yeah.
went through I went through the momentum with my mother. I went through the momentum with my children, and then with my husband. And I had to go through all of those and say, how did I forsake authenticity with these people in order
Mm.
to stay attached with them?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it was really
What a beautiful story,
yeah, it
Trace.
was.
Yeah.
And so even just looking at a hair elastic now, I know
You
that
can
that's
feel that.
yeah, I can feel it. And
Yeah.
obviously I'm still emotional about that, which is funny. Why do I still feel so
Well,
like,
I think that's the way it is. Like the person in recovery, the person who's now like just a little more connected inside, a little more insight. They understand what's going on, more compassion. But they're still, who they are. These things that, here you are, in your 50s, you've taken a lot of time to develop these systems, right? It's,
Yeah.
these are very quickly accessed. So that makes sense. And we can all feel that. But even what you just did there, I could just feel as you noticed that, part that grabbed on, and that insight instantly you had, like, holy cow, that's what I do. I
Hmm.
attach. There's so much compassion. I could hear it, right? And that's that to me is the most important part, is that you begin to, like, when we work with these parts like this. So you just described a part that when it believes that the connection is being threatened, and usually you might say things that you're doing or saying that then I have to be non-authentic now. I can't let them know what I really think and feel or whatnot, because they'll pull back from me.
Hmm.
That this part's going to like attach. So you can go to that part and just connect to wherever it is in your body, and just say, before we go any further, just thank you so much for trying to protect me. It could be
Hmm.
one of the most moving moments in life when you just realize, just this young little part of you is it's just doing its best to keep you safe. And now here you are in your 50s, year old. I don't need you to do that anymore. I'll tell you a little story. When I was a little boy, about 4 years old, we didn't have much money, so I got a quarter for allowance once a month. At a quarter for allowance. And my mom was having a hard day. I remember this. So dad gave us our allowance on a Saturday. We got our allowance on a Saturday. And I remember mom was at the table with her coffee and cigarette and was just crying. And I just wanted to make her feel better so bad. And I went down to the little corner store in Kerrisdale that was near our house. And I went to the man and I said, because we didn't have any food and much anyways. And I just said to the man, can I buy a loaf of bread? I don't know what a loaf of bread costs, but he gave me a loaf of bread for a quarter. And I came back and I gave my mom this loaf of bread. I said, "Here, mommy, here's this loaf of bread for you." Now, that sweet little boy, right? Just trying to soothe and calm his mom, but it's not going to work. It's not going to solve all her problems. It's trying to help so bad, but really, that's not helpful behavior. It's like mom wanted me to spend the 25 cents on candy or something like that, right? And that's how I feel like our parts, they're just trying to help. And this is
Hmm.
the only way they know. And they really believe if they can just get you to do more of this other stuff, that then we'll keep the connection, because they say we'll never ever let that connection be broken. And when we see what's going on, when we can, like you did in that psychedelic session, where you felt that hair elastic, you felt it, you went, look at that. So now we can just always come to that part. Thank you so much, sweetie. Thank you so
Hmm.
much. And I don't need it. I'm not scared of an argument with my partner. I'm not afraid to, for me and my kid to get into it, or my mom, or whatever it is. We'll work through it. We got good history. We're not going to fall apart. You need to really trust me that I've got this. Right. And just see if it'd be willing to relax, because, they really make life annoying when they're always flooding us with anxiety. Thanks for sharing that story, Trace. That's very
Hmm.
beautiful. And it's,
Hmm.
it's exactly what probably almost everyone who's listening, in their own way, in their own model, kind of feel. But anyways, back to the psychedelic question, I guess, is what you're
Yeah.
asking through all that.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
so
Tell us
when I
about that. Tell us what's new in the field and tell us why this could be,
well, when I
therapy.
first started learning about it, and understand, I'd been a therapist for about 25 years at that point. And I was really frustrated with some of the models, to like, even internal family systems, to kind of get at this, get the exhaled energy released. And it was then that I started learning the research, pardon me, started learning the research about mushrooms and MDMA primarily. And once I got into the research, not into the kind of stigma stuff, but got into the research, holy, this is powerful. So that I said, okay, I'm going to learn it, and I did, and now I train people in it, and so I'm like, I understand this pretty good. So to me, it's, can you imagine if we discovered, it's like a medication, for example, that could, like, cure Alzheimer's. I'll make something. Like, we found a medication cure. Like, hey, we found a medicine cure Alzheimer's. My God, we've been waiting for this for. And
Mm.
then we find out, oh, but that medication's against the law. That you're not allowed to use against the law. I said, oh, well. Yeah, I can see why it's against the law over there, but let's just kind of allow it over here because if we give it to people with Alzheimer's, it cures Alzheimer's. No, 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 no. You can't do
Mm.
that. It's against the law. That's how we feel with psychedelics. That
Sure.
before the embargo came on under Nixon in 1970, over 50,000 people were studied with these psychedelics,
Wow.
like alcoholism, smoking, depression, you name it. Just amazing. It was a breakthrough. But then, the war on drugs came and it just stopped. And, it was in the deep freeze for 30, 35 years and then kind of came out. And now we're very slowly getting back to its efficacy, but it's still, against the law. It's technically against the law, which scares most people away.
Yeah.
And for therapists who want to practice it, I was just on a supervision call yesterday, and these wonderful therapists who are just trying to help their clients, and these medicines are safely. When we understand to use them, they're safe, right? Under certain conditions, there's no safety issue at all, but they're scared to lose their license,
Yeah.
and then of course then clients, if they don't know. But so that's the big cloud around all of it, that it's just too bad that we've got all this kind of noise because they're not dangerous. Yes, I'll think of ecstasy. Is ecstasy street drug? Is it a problem? Absolutely, it's a problem. I don't want people using street drugs, but use MDMA, medical grade MDMA used in a therapeutic context is, I've never seen anything like it. It's
Mm.
it's it's its ability to lower our fears long enough so that we can allow the exhales out. Just unbelievable. So you have these two psychedelics primarily right now we're looking at, which is psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and MDMA, and they're very, very different. And so when when I think of people with big trauma, I want them to do MDMA first because MDMA
Mm.
is gentle. It's a little more complicated therapeutically. It can take a little more time, but it allows things to come out at an easier pace because our managers get really scared about this stuff, right? Psilocybin is excellent for breaking long-term patterns of behavior and thought, but the price of admission for psilocybin is a little steeper than it is for MDMA. In other words, it can be pretty chaotic, and
Mm.
and there's some people I just say I don't want you to start with psilocybin. Now it sounds like you were in a mushroom session, so it was like great that you could withstand kind of the kind of chaos which some people get, but it can have these moments of like brilliant clarity, and like you can come out of it just feeling like you got an insight that the one person said to me, and you hear this a lot, it's worth 10 years of therapy in one session.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And just think about the insight you got, that moment of clarity when you felt that elastic. I've, not to dismiss the beauty of your experience, but I've heard it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, that
Mm-hmm.
very same thing. And so they're both very, very powerful. Psilocybin's real signature right now is for people who've been given a diagnosis of a potentially life-threatening disease like cancer, and then
Mm-hmm.
they get into like deep emotional distress, the fear of death, whatnot comes, and that seems to be where psilocybin is just, it's on its game. It, like in studies, it cures it. It cures that end of life distress 85% of the time.
What
85%.
So what's the mechanism? What is happening? Are we having a profound realization that we are more than just what
That's
is
what people
here
say.
or what? Yeah, tell
That's
us
what
what's
people say.
happening.
It's called a noetic kind of experience. So it's like it's a different kind of knowing. But for the vast majority of people, they have some sort of spiritual experience where when it's over, they don't fear dying anymore.
Mm.
They just are more at peace with that. And it's almost as if, you could say, whatever it is, whatever's next. And there is a next. I mean, they all have this strong conviction that this life isn't all there is. Whatever's next, it's going to be good. And I don't
Mm.
have to fear it. And then when they don't have to fear it, they're able then to enter back into their life today and live their life today on its own terms, even if it means, potentially a terminal diagnosis. I'm going to die in the next few years, or even just long-term chemo, radiation, whatever. It just, we're more at peace with it. You don't have to enjoy it. Like
Yeah.
nobody enjoys these sorts of things, but their life isn't ruled by this like massive levels of despair and distress. And the mechanism is, you don't want me to get into neuroscience, so it gets pretty nerdy, but the part of our brain up here is where all the noise is produced, and chatter and whatnot. Well, at higher doses, and in the with psilocybin, we think therapeutically 5 grams of dried mushrooms is that kind of massive dose that's required for this population, not everybody, but for this population. What it does is it deactivates that part of the brain so that you're more subcortical, or you might even we might talk in terms of you get connected to your spirit in a more direct way. But for many people, the price of that is when you lose our controlling brain, our brain that makes sense of things right here and now, that goes away, and it's more free floating. And some people love that. Some people really enjoy it. People like me don't as much. I don't like the feeling of losing control. And so that's, like you mentioned, that's where having two guides that you feel very safe with, that won't take advantage of you, they're there for you. Just simply holding their hands, feeling their energy of love for you can be all that's needed to just kind of keep it within a certain framework of tolerance. So we're at a very interesting point. Like I personally trained over 300 healthcare professionals in the use of these medicines, and it's been beautiful. But while Canada is probably leading the world in being progressive in this area, we still, my organization, Theracell, we are still battling Health Canada all the time. And quite frankly, Health Canada's just said, we're not going to allow this. It's
Mm,
a political issue, and it's just not going to
mm,
happen. And so that, having said that, access to psilocybin has never been easier. People can go online, get good clean mushrooms. There's no problem there. But it really goes back to the clinicians now. It puts in my opinion, an unfair burden on these poor clinicians to have to, maybe put their certification or the licensure at risk. I don't think it
yeah,
is at risk, but it's
yeah,
it's their families, their livelihood. It's not mine, and so I got to
yeah,
respect
sure.
their appetite for risk, and it can be scary, and I think that's so. It's too bad. It really is too
Yeah,
bad, because these
yeah,
medicines are like of a different category. Someone said it's like it has the potential for mental health problems. These psychedelics, ketamine, psilocybin, MDMA, they have the potential of impacting mental health problems as much as penicillin did for infections.
wow.
And where would we be today without antibiotics, right? It's just
Yeah,
a staple of our life. That's how impactful they can be. And yeah, we're not allowed to use them. We're
yeah.
not allowed to use them. So
One of the things I noticed, this was about, I want to say maybe 3 years ago that I did that session. And post session, those months that are right afterwards, everything is fresh and in your brain, right? It's like your capacity to access the way that you want your wise self to show up is greater. And
yeah,
then you sort of fast forward 3 years, and just the other day, last week sometime, sometimes I think, oh, will I ever be over some of the issues that I deal with, and have I really changed? And then this happened about a couple days ago.
I love this
Um,
story already.
there was an opportunity to either shut down and allow the person that I was speaking to have the final word, or there was an opportunity for me to rise up and be my authentic self and say something. And it's so interesting that in my whole life past, I would have just shut down and wanted the attachment. But now, instead of carrying that burden that was not mine to carry, I put it back on the person and I held on to myself and I said what I needed to say in a kind way, still, like
No, no,
very,
sure, yeah.
right. It was kind. But then, you know what I did afterwards? This is funny, but I went to my phone and I pulled up the playlist and I put on Katy Perry's Roar.
I love that
I
song. Yeah.
used to bite my tongue and hold my breath. But now I'm gonna say my
What an
thing.
anthem for you. That's
I
beautiful.
know.
Yeah.
And then I just started crying. And I'm like, you did it, Trace. Which is
Wow.
funny. But it's
No, it
that
is. This is
like
these are the
this works
small
still. Yeah.
moments of like brilliant courage in our life that we step back from and say, look at me growing.
Yeah.
Look at me becoming the person I want to be. This is who I
Yes.
want to be. Of
Yeah.
course I want to be attached. I want to be attached to everyone. That's a beautiful thing. And
Yeah.
sometimes the price of that attachment is losing my authentic self. That's the price I don't feel like paying. And so how can I put it back to you, say, look, I don't want to lose attachment with you, but you need to know I
Yeah.
believe A, B, and C, or I don't agree with you there. And I hope we don't lose attachment because I love you and I don't want to lose this connection. But right now, I'll be okay. I'll be okay
Mm,
if you don't think,
mm-hmm,
well, I can hear that in you, Tracy. And I've known
mm-hmm,
you for a very, very long time.
mm-hmm,
And I can see that there is a shift, that there, like, even for you'll be able to have clarity in the moment to say, oh, I know what's happening here. I've just
mm-hmm.
got a part of me that's scared of losing attachment, which is
Yes.
beautiful. Thank you for caring, but I don't think my life is in danger.
Yeah.
So I'll be okay and I'll learn how to manage this and we'll be fine. And I can hear it in your voice. It's just really
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. It is definitely yeah, something that rises up. Even asking you to be on the podcast is funny because I told Quentin, oh, I'm more nervous with Dave than I am with lots of famous people that I've interviewed. Not that you're
I'm
not
not famous.
famous in your own way.
I
But
got to deal with that.
I know. But I've had
I'm
like
teasing. I'm
big
teasing.
doctors on that
I'm
are,
teasing. Yeah.
like anyway. But why? I'm like, why? Why is my heart beating faster in this interview before it was about to start than in so many others?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because my opinion of you matters.
Yeah.
That's all. We
Right.
go back a long time. I was your youth pastor. I've been your
Yeah.
mentor. We've
Yeah.
been you. I employed you for a
Yeah.
while, and
Yeah.
so I've had this role in your life that we call in there we call it transference. So it's like as little children we want, hey, mommy and daddy, be proud of
Yeah.
me, be proud of me, and we when we get teachers or doctors or whatever that we look up to, we want them to be proud of us. We want them to say, um, I'm doing good, right? I'm doing good. And when we never know, as we
Mm-hmm.
risk it. And so we'd be like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm nervous because I care a lot about Dave. So when you say that to me, I'm almost crying. I mean, that means the world that's how much, I mean to you. And yet I also can feel you're your own person.
Mm-hmm.
You're this brilliant. I mean, I follow you, Tracy, the business you've built, this movement you've built, helping primarily women, but helping, people how to move, how to be healthy, physically healthy and mentally healthy in their life. It's so admirable. And I know the stuff that you faced in your life, and yet you retain a certain I don't know, what's the word? There's a grace about you. There's just a
Mm-hmm.
certain je ne sais quoi that you always are going to get with Tracy. And I love that.
No, thank you. When you're working with parts, there is these decks of cards that are called
Yeah,
parts
yeah,
cards, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And anyone can buy them. You can get them on Amazon. And so it's maybe 50 different types of cards that
75. Yeah, yeah,
75 that can
yeah, yeah.
portray your parts. So we've been talking about the parts of us that rise up to protect us. And one of the parts, and so you can flip through them and see which pictures resonate with
Yes,
your
which one
part.
kind of connects with you? Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So you probably aren't surprised by this, but the one that resonated the most with me was the Barbie doll.
yeah.
She's a Barbie doll. She's got her hair up in a
I
ponytail.
used it on the weekend with a class I was teaching. Yeah.
And she's got and there's people in the background holding up scorecards, right? And they've got 10 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 3 out of 10 or whatever. And that part resonates with me more than lots of any other one in that deck. And I just find that interesting because I've shared this with my audience before, but oh, that I would be in a position and in a calling, in a job that puts myself on display every single day in front of a camera, in front of an
Right,
audience,
right. How did this
right?
happen? What a
And
fluke.
oh,
He
and the
says tongue in cheek.
struggle just to be that authentic self and not go for the scorecard is just tremendous every single day.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
I mean, again, it's a very beautiful part of you that has learned if I can behave a certain way,
Mm,
get a certain rating from the people, I'm safe. I'm safe.
and
The
say,
connection's
right,
there. But I'll
right.
tell you and you know this too, that what that part of you needs more than anything else is that stamp of approval from yourself, right?
Yeah.
Because we know ourselves the best. I found when I have come to authentically love my parts, and I made a really big breakthrough this last year when I can do that. Loving other people is a piece of cake, right? It's
Mm,
just like I'm the hardest one for me to love, right?
mhm,
And I had an experience of love this last year where I just felt so special. I felt so seen. I felt so beautifully loved that um, I'm noticing that when people, like what you just said to me, for example, why do I get nervous around you, Dave? And
Mm,
you know, and I know what's going on. You think a lot of me, and I would say even up until even last year, I'd have deflected that a little bit. But
mm,
now I'm letting it in. Now I'm letting
mm,
that love in and saying, here's someone that I care deeply about. You know I do it, and that she cares about me, and I let that love in. Or someone after I teach a class or whatever, wow, that was great, Dave. Thanks so much. Rather than like, it's what I do, you know, whatever little deflection I might make, I'm letting it get into my body,
mm,
feel what it feels like to be loved. This is you, Dave. This is the
mm,
beautiful gift you are to our species, to the people in your life, and to yourself. And when I allow myself to be rated by myself, like I love you. Like one of the interventions I've done for years, I learned it at a workshop, and I remember, wow, that sounds so cool. And I teach it to people. It's a 30-day thing. Okay. So when you first get up in the morning, you know, no makeup, no hair, you know, no shaving, you're just you. And you look in the mirror and you say these words: Good morning, I love you. And
mm,
then pay attention. What comes up when you say those words? And then take a little time, the next few minutes, to journal out. And it could be like, I felt nothing. I don't love myself. I just said the words, whatever. It's just what you just, and then go the next morning. You do it
mm,
for 30 days, 30 consecutive days. You look in the mirror, look yourself in the eye and say, Good morning, I love you. By the end of the 30 days, you'll be shocked at
yeah,
how much more that goes in, and you feel it. And that's,
yeah,
you know, that and my Reiki affirmations are how my meditations every day, right? I start every morning. I get up, look, because that's something I'm always going to go brush my teeth and do all this stuff, right? And I look in the mirror and I just say, Good morning, I love you.
yeah,
And it's just a practice that I've had. And so I found that when we, like I say, love ultimately starts with me. I have the greatest capacity to love myself. And, you know, so again, I can see that Barbie doll. I taught
mm,
a training this weekend for therapists. And I was working with one of the therapists, and that was the one she picked. Right. We did a lot of work with that part. And I can just see the card. By the way, the cards are so good because when most of the stuff is just like ideas and concepts, but when you can see a picture and you go like,
yeah,
wow, that one
yeah,
called right.
that's
It's
me.
so useful, right? You can kind of put it on your phone or whatever. You can look at it whenever you need to look at it. And that, you know, this part that is tried, especially for, you know, you know this, Trace, because you taught it all to me, the template we have for women, the beauty template. They have to serve a
Mhm,
certain way, they have to look a certain way, they have to have a certain kind of presence in a room, and it can be a straitjacket. It can be so demanding because our bodies change and morph over time. We can't always be 5% body fat. We can't, you know, it's just too hard. And but you can feel the pressure of that rating when you can begin saying, I'm not gonna, you know, define my life on how others will rate me. I'm going to rate myself.
mhm,
I'm going to come along these parts and say to all my parts, especially this little Barbie doll, I I am so appreciative for how hard you've worked to keep me safe. I'll never be able to express how
mm,
much that means to me.
mhm,
And I don't need you to do it anymore.
mhm,
I'm not in danger anymore. Of course I want people to approve of me. By the way, there's no crime there. It's
mhm,
okay to want the approval. It's okay to want to exceed. It's okay to want someone to look at you and say, "Hey, you know, you're beautiful." That's fine. Yay, bring it in. But I don't need you to do it. Like if
mhm.
you don't do it, I'll be fine, right? That's if we can begin working with our parts inside, that's what makes the big difference.
Yeah. I did a meditation the other day, and my favorite girl on Insight Timer is Sarah Blondin. And
I
she
don't know
did
her.
do you know her?
No, I don't. I've never.
No,
Who is
she's
she?
local, actually. She's from the Okanagan, I
Okay.
think, Peachland or Summerland. Anyway, and she's very popular on Insight Timer because her voice is unreal, but she does a lot of I don't know, what is it, prose maybe. She just tells a story in essence about self. And she did this little experiment the other day too, where she just kept saying, say this to yourself: I love you, you are safe. I love you, you are safe. And then like the tears just start streaming when you say that I love you to yourself. So when you were saying that as an experiment, I totally want to do that for 30 days. I think that would be profound for my own experience. And yes, without all the glam and glitz, I do like to put my best self forward because this is my job. So there's that part. And you're like,
And
there's nothing wrong with that.
it's not nothing
Right.
not wrong. It's a great thing. I mean,
Yeah.
my wife Adele is a beautiful woman. I mean, she's legitimately a beautiful woman,
Oh,
and she takes time to be beautiful. And
yeah.
I like that she does it. And she makes my whole life beautiful. My house is beautiful. Believe me, it
Yeah.
wouldn't look like this if she wasn't. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to
Yeah.
bring beauty into the world. That's a beautiful
Mm-hmm.
thing. But
Mm-hmm.
but when we have to bring beauty, when
Mm-hmm.
like do it when I have to be beautiful on my days where I'm feeling sick or
Mm-hmm.
bloated or whatever it might
Mm-hmm.
be, that's really when the rubber meets the road, that
Yeah.
we can work these parts and say, of course, I'd like to look beautiful today. I feel good when I look beautiful, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing wrong with that. But to be able to say, look in the mirror, my authentic, real person. I just love you. I really love you. You're what a gift you are, Dave, Tracy, whoever, to the
Mm-hmm.
people in your life, to your world. That's when you get there and you can authentically mean it. Again, it's life's just pretty easy after that.
I have one more question for you. I'd just like to finish with this. Can we just talk about why curiosity and compassion are so important and how do we bring those toward ourselves?
Yeah, so I mean, again, you've opened up a pretty big topic, but Brent Atkinson's a neuroscientist. Years ago, he identified seven discrete systems of the brain that are like they're not just like neural networks, but they're discrete, important system processes of the brain. And one of the fastest is fear.
Hmm.
And so when you get afraid of something, it's a very fast circuit in a
Sure.
sense, not really a circuit, but it's a very fast process that can take over your brain before you even know what's going on. And, so that makes it a challenge for us, right? If fear can be activated before I'm even aware that it's been activated. It's interesting though, the seven processes. Fear is number two, but the fastest of all is what we call seeking or learning, or we could just use the word curiosity. So when you notice that
Hmm.
a fear reaction has started, and usually that's just pay attention to your body a little bit. When you notice simply asking a question, I wonder what's going on, that's faster than fear. And so it will dislodge fear for a short period of time, which then gives you options, right? So curiosity is like just simply asking questions. I wonder what's happening here. I wonder how I got triggered. I wonder, right? Just very basic questions about what's happened. That's the value of curiosity. It helps us to step back from our fear, which buys you time
Right.
to allow your values, your top brain to sort of, oh, right, of course. Like I'll be like, of course I've read. Someone just said that my clothes are funny or something like that, right? Or what did you
Yeah.
say to me earlier? Look in the camera, Dave, or something. Just whatever. I was like, oh, right. It's so that's why we're curious. Compassion is, and I'll really say self-compassion.
Yeah.
So, University of California, Berkeley has just been the leading institution in the world. Back in the '90s, we called it the pop psych movement, but it's really not pop psych. Sorry. They're all positive psychology, right? So they've really been invested over 30 years in trying to understand happiness, what makes us happy, and over the last 10 years, they pivoted to as they began to really understand into what they call emotional resilience, and they say they've developed like it's now four, but long time is the three pillars of emotional resilience. So these are behaviors and whatnot that if we can get more of them in our life, we don't even have to worry about like the therapy, like going back and fixing things. Emotional resilience just makes us stronger in life, right? And so there's four now. So there's one is gratitude. That's one of the main ones for emotional resilience. One is mindfulness, which is again this curiosity thing, be able to step back. The new one on the block that we're learning is being a really impactful element of emotional resilience we call playfulness. So we get in touch with
Mm-hmm.
play. But there's
Mm-hmm.
one which is just standing on its own as like the Lord of emotional resilience or the Lady of emotional resilience. It's called self-compassion. It's like our brains are hardwired for self-compassion, so that when you actually uh, exercise self-compassion, you like what you said earlier from this woman Sue, was it this that's got the blonde, who is that?
Oh yeah, Sarah Blondin.
Sarah Blunt, that just that little mantra that she has, what that does, it
Hmm.
starts exercising self-compassion. For me, this
Yeah.
is really interesting because we've now, because of neuroscience, we're looking deep into the black box.
Mm.
What's the source code? What is the source code of being a human being? Our consciousness, right? We've seen the source. This is what Berkeley has shown. What makes the brain work the best? How does this brain stay healthy all through the life? What is the key? What's at the code of being a human being? It's love.
Mm.
It's love. It's not hatred. It's not survival. It's love. And self-compassion, this deep love I can have for myself, which, dude, I know can be super hard to do and challenging. It's not just easy to snap your fingers and make it happen. But when you can authentically have compassion for yourself, so that, one of the most common things I see, especially for women, one of the most common things is a double standard. So they will
Mm. Yeah.
treat they will treat others a certain way, and yet they treat themselves so horrible. And if so, I know, like, your basic mother who loves her children, knows how to care and nurture and be present for their children, attachment, whatnot. I know she's got the circuitry. She knows how to do it. Her brain works that. All we have to do is just kind of flip it a little bit. So I want you to take that same beautiful, caring, other focused love that you know how to do and turn it toward yourself. Give yourself the same kind of, give yourself a break. Give yourself one of the big ones. Give yourself the benefit of the doubt, right? We give everyone else the benefit of the doubt. We don't give ourselves. Those are small little ways. And we do notice that when we can exercise it, the brain works the best. And this is one of the leading institutions, research institutions into the brain in the world, right? And this is what their research is showing time and time again. Gratitude is also amazing. I love gratitude. Mindfulness, beautiful. Playfulness, beautiful. But if you wanted, like, I'm only going to do one thing to
Mm.
really improve my overall well-being, self-compassion is it.
Mm. Yeah, the rules of the universe are not different for you. I think I learned that from you.
We all live, but isn't that kind of cool that that
Yeah, that's
that this to me
lovely.
is epistemological? Like,
Yeah,
what's life all about? Well,
yeah,
if I've looked deep into how the brain is hardwired, and it's hardwired to work best with love,
yeah,
that should open our eyes to the nature of the universe.
yeah, yeah. And let that just wrap you up with a warm hug there, folks. Thanks so much, Dave. That was
Yeah, I
very
loved it.
insightful and
Yeah.
just encouraging that there are ways through our pain, right? There's a lot of therapy available. There's a lot of different strategies for therapy. I know a lot of it costs money, and so for for that sort of no cost approach, there are a lot of books you can get at your library. Dr. Richard Schwartz's book, No Bad Parts, is available there. Other resources that you would rate or things to listen to or to read that are low cost or no cost, Dave?
Yeah, I think No Bad Parts is good. I like your suggestion. If you can buy the cards, they cost about
Yeah.
$50. But
Yeah.
then, because Richard Schwartz is wonderful. He gets you to, like, actual exercise. Get the audiobook, by the way. The audiobook, he narrates it. And so he does exercises with you in real time. So it's just like
Mm,
therapy. And if you can
mm,
find cards that, like you say, that you can actually start imagining these parts, yeah, that's a really, really good one.
mhm.
I like John Kabat-Zinn's
Yes.
book, Full
Meditation.
Catastrophe Living. He wrote it
Hmm.
like 25 years ago, and it still stands at that time. This is a guy who, when he was a young physician, he started working in one of the major metro hospitals in Boston, and he said, "I want to work with your hardest patients." So they gave him a little office in the basement in the pathology lab, and he got all the hard pain clients from these are the patients the cancer docs didn't want to work with anymore, and the burn
Mm,
victims. And he said he started working with this group. He said the average pain out of 10 for this group was 8.5. So and that's pretty intense, right? And simply teaching them basic mindfulness strategies,
mhm.
right? He said in an 8-week group they went from 8.5 down to 5. And so,
Wow.
and 5 still sounds pretty big, but you talk to anyone who said 8.5 pain, if you get to 5, it feels like you've been given a new lease on life. And that's basic mindfulness training. So full catastrophe living still holds up in today's environment. And
That's,
he's
I think I took a mindfulness course from you, and didn't you teach you can have pain with suffering?
yeah, suffering is pain is part of life. Suffering is optional. That's one of his things. And he has a quote in that book, which has been my life mantra. It says, to live life as if each moment were important, as if each moment counted and could be worked with, even if it's a moment of pain, sadness, despair, or fear. And that Adele and I went through one of life's worst experiences, and it was hard. It was very, very challenging. And yet that perspective, like even in the hardest moments, to say, I'm not going to run from this pain, but I'm going to be present with it, and I'm going to work with it. That more than anything else helped both of us, both Adele and I, work through something really challenging as that.
Lovely words to end by.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for being my guest today. And to all of you, thanks for listening. And now go move daily in your fitness, wellness, and nutrition. And we'll see you all in the next Move Daily Talks.